Beginning in the later 1800s, it really taken off during the 1910s through the 1920s. Barbed wire cut across the American landscape, forming farm towns and industrial centers. Japanese immigrants and their American-born children were quietly building lives of resilience, ambition, and cultural pride along the West Coast and throughout the Pacific Northwest. You see, they had arrived in waves beginning in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, typically as farmhands, laborers, fishermen, and small business owners, contributing to about 10% of the U.S. economic production by the mid-1930s. Many of these first-generation Japanese-born Americans, known as the Issei, came with little more in their bags than determination. They worked grueling hours in Hawaiian sugar plantations or carved farms on marginal land in California, Washington, and Oregon. What others had dismissed as barren or unworkable land, they transformed into productive fields. By 1940, though they controlled only less than 4% of California's farmland, they produced more than 10% of the state's agricultural value. Children, known as the Nisei, were born American citizens. They attended local public schools, spoke English fluently, and grew up navigating two worlds alongside their predominantly white and Native American counterparts. At home, however, they learned to speak the Japanese language, the Bushido code of customs and traditions. In the public sphere, however, they pledged their allegiance to the American flag. Their parents encouraged this dual identity, not as a burden to bear in a multi-ethnic nation, but as a nod to their ancestry and to their new home. If the Issei cannot fully belong due to discriminatory laws, perhaps, just maybe, their children could. Remember, this was Jim Crow era America, and it wasn't just the Black Americans who faced segregation in public affairs. It also included Japanese, German and Irish immigrants who faced the same crime and discrimination from other ethnicities, Catholics, and pretty much everyone not naturally born here. The Great Depression of the 1930s brought hardship to nearly everyone in the United States. Banks collapsed, unemployment soared, and families lost homes overnight. Yet, within this devastation, Japanese American communities found unexpected opportunity. Not economic ease, but a chance to define themselves more clearly within American society. In fact, accredited primarily to their can-do work ethic, I do believe, Japanese Americans during the Depression, specifically the Issei and the Nisei, were on an equal and often better off spectrum, financially speaking, than most other Americans per capita. They organized. Community associations sprang up to coordinate social life and represent Japanese Americans in public affairs. Business networks formed, allowing Japanese-owned farms, shops, and services to support one another. Cultural events, picnics, dances, festivals invite neighbors of all backgrounds. In cities like Seattle, Japanese Americans volunteered in large numbers for the Red Cross and local charities, demonstrating their civic commitment during a time of national struggle. Education became a cornerstone. Nisei students stayed in school longer, many pursuing college degrees in hopes of entering professional fields like law, dentistry, and even business. Meanwhile, organizations such as Japanese American Citizen League encouraged political participation, voter registration, and advocacy for civil rights. In fact, by the 1920s and 30s, The average Issei citizen was doing better than the majority of black Americans and a large portion of the white Americans as well. For a brief moment, it seemed progress was possible. Slowly, cautiously, some barriers softened. Some neighbors began to see Japanese Americans not as outsiders, but as hard-working contributors to their communities. But beneath this progress lay a fragile truth: that acceptance was conditional. You see, racial prejudice had never really disappeared. Laws still barred the Issei from owning land or becoming citizens. Immigration from Japan had been severely restricted. Anti-Asian sentiment simmered beneath the surface, fueled mostly by economic competition and long-standing stereotypes. Even as Japanese Americans built bridges, many Americans continued to view them with suspicion, especially in larger cities, where Japanese-only neighborhoods became sizable areas. And beyond American shores, events were unfolding that would soon shatter everything. So in 1937, the Japanese Empire launched a full-scale invasion of China. What followed would become some of the most horrific atrocities of the 20th century. The Japanese forces captured the Chinese capital Nanjing. Violence erupted on a massive scale. Soldiers executed prisoners of war, often after promising humane treatment. Civilians were slaughtered in the streets. Women and girls, hundreds of thousands of them, were subjected to sexual violence. Bodies filled rivers and mass graves. The event would later be known as the Grape of Nanking, and estimates of the dead reach into hundreds of thousands. Elsewhere, secret military programs pushed brutality into the realm of calculated science. In hidden facilities, prisoners were used for human experimentation. Diseases were deliberately spread. Entire villages and islands were killed off as a means to study the spread of diseases. Victims were exposed to extreme conditions to study survival limits. These operations, later revealed to the world, showed a chilling disregard for human life. Japan even had a sexual pipeline for captured women. Numbering over 1 million, young women as low as age 12 and older were forced into sexual slavery all over the expanding empire. As of today, it's estimated that 20% of the Pacific Island population shares Japanese DNA due to the sexual exploration during this time. News of these atrocities spread internationally, shaping global perception of Japan. In the United States, they contributed to growing distrust, not just of Japan as a nation, but tragically for people of Japanese ancestry more broadly. Then came the day. On that morning, Japanese aircraft struck the U.S. naval fleet based at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Battleships burned. Thousands of American servicemen were killed or wounded. The attack stunned the nation and propelled the United States into World War II. Anti-Japanese fear swept across the country, but nowhere was it more intense than along the West Coast. Rumors of espionage and sabotage spread rapidly. Newspapers, politicians, and military officials warned of potential threats from within. Japanese Americans, many of whom had lived in the United States for decades at this time, or were born here, were suddenly seen through a lens of suspicion. Despite prior investigations finding little evidence of disloyalty, although the Japanese mafia were found to have minimal operations amongst the Issei populations, public pressure mounted. Economic rivals saw opportunity. Long-standing prejudices found new justification. Calls for removal grew louder. President Franklin D. Roosevelt faced a nation at war and a population demanding action. Advisors were divided. Some warned that mass removal would violate constitutional rights. Others argued it was necessary for national security. And on February 19th, 1942, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. The order itself did not mention Japanese Americans by name. Instead, it granted military authorities the power to designate certain areas as military zones and exclude any person from them. In practice, however, it was applied mostly exclusively to those of Japanese ancestry. What followed was swift and yet devastating. Families received notices giving them days, sometimes only 48 hours, to prepare to move. They were instructed to bring only what they could carry. Homes, businesses, farms, and possessions were left behind or sold at a fraction of their potential value. Entire communities were uprooted. At first, they were sent to temporary assembly centers, fairgrounds, racetracks, and makeshift facilities. Families lived in converted horse stalls, the smell of animals still lingering. Privacy was non-existent. Conditions were crowded and uncomfortable. Soon after, they were transported by train or truck to more permanent camps located in remote areas of the desert country. These camps were surrounded by barbed wire and guarded by soldiers. Inside stood rows of hastily constructed barracks made of wood and tar paper. Summers brought intense heat. Winters brought the bitter cold. Dust storms swept through some camps, coating everything in fine grit. Despite the conditions, though, life continued. Schools were established. Medical facilities were organized. Religious services were held. Many internees took jobs within the camps, teaching, cooking, maintaining the infrastructure, even becoming the U.S. military's Japanese linguistic centers, earning small wages. But normalcy was an illusion. They were prisoners without charges. From 1943 to 1945, roughly 120,000 people were incarcerated. Nearly 70,000 of them were American citizens. No trials were held. No evidence of wrongdoing was required. Their only crime was their ancestry. Outside the camps, legal challenges emerged. Individuals refused to comply with curfews and relocation orders, arguing that their constitutional rights had been violated. Their cases reached the Supreme Court. The court upheld the government's actions, citing military necessity. Inside the camps, though, many struggled with anger, confusion, and even loss. Yet, even there, loyalty persisted. Thousands of Japanese Americans volunteered or were drafted in the U.S. military, serving in segregated units. They fought in Europe and the Pacific, earning recognition for bravery and sacrifice, even as their families remained behind barbed wire at home. By 1944, the tide began to turn. Court decisions challenged aspects of the incarceration policy, and the government gradually began releasing detainees. Camps closed over the next 2 years, but freedom did not mean restoration. Families returned to find homes gone, businesses lost, and communities scattered. Many had to rebuild from nothing. Some relocated to new areas, unwilling or unable to return to places where they had once faced hostility. For decades, the injustice lingered. In 1976, the U.S. government formally acknowledged that the order had been wrong. Later, investigations concluded that the incarceration had been driven not by military necessity, but by racial prejudice, war hysteria, and failures of political leadership. In 1988, legislation provided a formal apology and financial compensation to surviving internees. It was a significant gesture, but one that could never fully restore what had been taken. The story of Executive Order 9066 is not only about wartime decisions, it is about the fragility of civil liberties in times of fear. It is about how quickly suspicion can override justice and how prejudice can shape policy. But it's also a story of resilience. Before the war, Japanese Americans built communities, businesses, and cultural bridges. During the war, they endured incarceration with dignity and, in many cases, continued to serve the country that had confined them. After the war, they rebuilt their lives and fought for recognition and justice. Their experience stands as a reminder: rights, once compromised, are not easily restored, and the strength of a nation is measured not only in how it deals itself from external threats, but in how it protects the freedom of its own people, especially in its moments of crisis.